just a few housekeeping things at the beginning. Again, we want you to please put your first and last name. Under participants, you'll see more. You can click on that and it'll say rename, and you can put your first and your last name. If you're on the LCAG, please put -LCAG or the organization that you're with. If you want to show your face, we'd love to see it. So you can put your camera on. This will be a recorded meeting, so keep that in mind. We have about 50 or so people in the meeting today. It will be a 2-hour meeting. We have a lot to cover, so we'll stick to our timeline as normal. There will be question and answer at various points throughout the presentation, so we will make sure that we can get to question and answer. You can use the chat feature to ask your questions at any time during the meeting. We will go through and answer questions from LCAG members, like I said, at the Q&A sections of the meeting. If you are calling in from a phone, you can text 337-263-9506 with your question. Or if you're calling in, please send us a text message with your first and last name so we know you're calling in from a phone. You should have that information in the overview document that we sent you last Friday. So it's 337-263-9506 to tell us who you are if you're calling in by phone, or to text us a question. But anyone that's joining us via computer, you can use the chat function and we'll get to your questions during the Q&A section of the meeting. With that being said, I will turn it over to Mr. Tim Nickel. Tim?
Thanks, Bree. Appreciate it. I'm glad that we have a good turnout this evening. We really want to get your input on some of these features, things that are very visible, impactful to the community. And so we really want to get y'all's input, your thoughts on some of these things. We're going to be going through a lot of the structural features and elements along the corridor and gathering input on it. So again, I'd like to thank y'all for being here this afternoon. And so I guess Steve or you want to move forward on the structures part and go through it?
Thank you, Tim. And good afternoon. This is Gary Major. I'm with LCP and I'm the task manager for structures. I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you and share with you the ideas that we have with regard to the Lafayette connector on this design workshop 2 meeting. So Bradley, I'm going to go to the next, please, and we'll talk a little bit about the agenda. And I want to start off how important it was that we want to get your feedback, all the time. And what we want to do, we want to devote the first part of this presentation to maybe opening up to additional questions that you may have from our previous meeting or clarifications. We're also going to share with you some of the initial comments and the results that we've received to date. And we're looking forward to getting more. So please don't stop doing that, because it's just so important to the process. You're also going to hear us talk about the signature feature bridges that we have presented, that we'll be presenting to you today. And then Jeff Grove in our group will be talking about the gateway opportunities that exist along the corridor. And then again, we'll end with some homework, right? We'll talk about homework. But again, we heard you last time. We're going to have a meeting a week from Thursday to talk really about this. And so you'll hear more about that when we get to the end. So next. So as we talked about in Design Workshop 1, we presented 3 alternatives. And we talked about how these alternatives are best suited for the mainline viaduct. And that was that 2-mile elevated corridor along the I-49 connection. We talked about how we evaluated it as from a construction cost standpoint, from maintenance of traffic and the aesthetic standpoints. And you can see here kind of a qualitative scoring that we've assigned to that. But but we've heard you talk, and we've got that input from you that we'll be sharing with you here on the next slide. But Bradley in our group also talked about the CSS structure options, some of the textures and themes and colors that can be applied to this mainline viaduct. And so we're going to present some of the results of that as well. So just to remind you, next slide, when we were talking about the CSS options, we talked about the 4 pier types, right? We talked about 3 various aesthetics that could be applied to the abutments that you see in the lower left. And then also we talked about the 2 different vertical clearance options that we were considering, both the 22 and the 30-foot option. So if you hit the button again, you'll kind of see where we landed. And what we had heard from the group is an initial preference for option 2, which is what you see there in the upper right, a natural theme for the rustication in the lower left for the abutment, and then the 22-foot height, right? That's what you see on the left there of those 2 structure options. So if I were to conclude that and go to the next slide, we had this homework, we met with you, we had breakout sessions. We've got a total of about, I think, 6 feedback forms to date that were distributed after Design Workshop 1. And we've also received numerous comments through the breakout sessions, which were a huge success. And with that input that we had gotten some the initial preference that was expressed by the LCAG. And there you can see a mainline structure type of a segmental box girder, option 2 for the pier type, as well as a natural theme for the abutments, and as well as for the retaining walls. And if you wanted to see what that looked like, that's what you see when you look on the right. That's exactly what this structure would look like with a 22-foot height. And I wanted to read through some of the comments that we've gotten to you, because it's important that that we share with you what we would hear. And some of these breakout sessions had comments about from the mainline structure. The SB girders are more appealing because there are fewer girders. Although it's a higher cost, there may be other benefits to speak of. And then likely on the abutment options, we may be able to tier these walls to provide a more aesthetic appeal. There was comments about how 22 feet was high enough. And those are important because we want to take those into our design as we move forward and advance the CSS process. So with that, I think I'd like to start introducing the discussion of the signature feature bridge. So why are we talking about signature feature bridges? And that particular topic has a history that has occurred along that you may know about, but we want to just at least share with you some of those sources of those. And we invite you to go back through, if you care, to look into those discussions, because we talked about that in some form or another, and most recently through the ECI report. So next, what else can signature feature bridge mean? Well, it may not actually be a bridge, right? It can be features along the corridor, a significant feature. It could be an elevated stretch, with enhanced treatments. We're going to see a lot of this today from Jeff in our gateway and from Bradley and Eric. And we, signature feature bridges needs to have a purpose. Why we're doing it is more than just your conventional one span, multi-span girder bridge. And then, they could serve from a CSS and also can incorporate design enhancements to really bring out what the community has to offer. And you're going to hear from us is how we evaluated these alternatives and these options. And you're going to hear from how we evaluated from a premium cost standpoint, a maintenance of traffic, from an inspection standpoint, maintenance, as well as aesthetics. And when you're talking about signature feature bridges, you really need to put an emphasis on aesthetics, because it needs to be visually pleasing, right? You want it to have a positive impact on the community. We've got an opportunity to provide options that have offer a lot of open space under the viaduct, because we have a bridge viaduct, as you remember, in our main line, that's roughly 150 feet wide. So that's an opportunity we want to take advantage of. And that's something for you to decide as we move into it. So let's get into my favorite part, almost my favorite part. Go ahead, Bradley. As an overview. Next. You heard last time we talked about the bridge locations and the walls along the corridor. And we talked about the viaduct. That is basically that 2-mile viaduct. But now we're going to talk about the signature feature bridges. And what's important, at least it is for this particular presentation, is a signature feature bridge spans across Johnson Street in this point. And that's number 5 on your slide. And that's really for evaluation purposes only, right? Because there are other opportunities and other locations for a signature feature bridge. And we'll share those with you here at the end of our presentation. But we wanted just to put that in front of you so you know this is where we're looking at now for evaluation purposes only. So let's get into our next and my favorite part of the presentation. So what we're seeing, we've got an opportunity here to share with you 5 different signature feature bridge options. And these options really range from a more conventional signature feature approach to really a true signature bridge. And they were developed by 2 of our bridge architects who have designed bridges really across the world. And they're really excited to share with you these options and the designs. And you're also going to hear about the inspiration that they had when they developed these options, because they wanted to make sure they apply most specifically to the Lafayette connector. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Bradley, and he's going to get started. And thank you. Go ahead, Bradley.
Thanks, Gary. And I want to emphasize how absolutely excited we are to be talking about this topic with you all. It really is a fantastic opportunity to do something that is significant for the community, to really create something that's iconic, that establishes the sense of place and gives us a real sense of community pride that can last for literally many generations to come. And so Eric and I have developed 5 different concepts. I'm going to talk about the first 3, and they are bridges that are based on the conventional bridge structures that we talked about in our last meeting, but these are enhancements or added signature features that get applied to those typical bridge types. So we talked about the LG girders and the LU girders and the SB girders. And any one of these 3 options can be applied to any one of those 3 conventional types of bridges. And we do that because it represents a more economical solution. And we want to make sure that we're giving you the full spectrum of options and possibilities, because we want to have a conversation with you and talk about what's important. What are the priorities? Not only in terms of form, but also in terms of location, configuration, and style. And then Eric is going to talk about 2 truly signature complex bridges. So these are iconic bridge structures that replace a section of the conventional mainline bridge with these complex bridge options. So I'm going to jump right in with the signature feature bridge options. The first one is what we call the PYLON bridge. And pylons are interesting. It's something that's been used for many, many, many years, literally centuries, to demarcate places of importance. So bridge heads, for example, to create a sense of a gateway, to establish a very significant place or moment along a pathway. And so we've started with introducing pylons on this structure. It also creates vertical lines, which allow a disruption of that horizontality of the mainline system. And so what we've done is just very simply taken a section of the mainline structure. And all of these, by the way, are at Johnston Street. And so we can talk later about locations, but for the purposes of comparing and contrasting options, we place everything at Johnston Street. And here you can see we've taken these very contemporary forms of pylons and established this zone of importance along the length of the corridor. And these things can be adapted with any sort of architectural style. They also offer an opportunity for additional ornamentation, precast medallions, for example. But they create, again, that special place, that moment along the corridor. And you can see that as you're driving along the main line, you can also get that sense of place. And these markers then really start drawing people's attention to the fact that this may be a place of particular importance. And so they can start kind of scanning the landscape as they're driving past. And then all of these options offer tremendous lighting opportunities. So here we're showing these as these beacons of light atop these pylons, and then also some uplighting on the pylons to create this very kind of elegant sort of form. And you can see what it does if we only illuminate the pylons, then it really allows this main line to hover over the piers below. And then similarly, you know, great opportunities for lighting at the deck level as well. And so that's the pylon bridge. And what we've done next is taken that same concept, but then thought about how might we use, you know, cables to introduce what we're calling the cable bridge. And cables certainly are a very traditional signature bridge element that are used throughout the world. They convey this wonderful sense of strength. We can also create a very contemporary form, which evokes sense of forward thinking or forward looking in terms of the community, and look at ways in which light might transform that element at night. And also thinking about, in this case, the Stratos bridges, which is a very modern version of the cable bridge that you're now beginning to see throughout the world. There's only a few of them in the United States right now, but it's something that's really getting a lot of traction. And so we've taken that same kind of pylon form, but now we've introduced these arrays of cables. And I will note though, for these three concepts, again, we have taken this conventional mainline structure. So you still see these support piers underneath the bridge. And then we've added on to that these signature bridge elements to create the form or appearance of these signature structures. And then again, seen from many different vantage points, these things really take on a very kind of sculptural shape. And then a very impressive kind of experience from the roadway. So now you're actually going through this narrow band of arrays of cables on either side of the roadway. And then like the pylon bridge, tremendous lighting opportunities. So we can actually illuminate these things and really have them become these wonderful kind of sculptural pieces at night, not only when viewed from the ground level, but also from the roadway. And then lastly, we've looked to a very traditional bridge form, and that's the suspension bridge. It's something that certainly is a classical form for a bridge, but one that has also been interpreted in much more contemporary ways, thinking specifically about the self-anchored suspension bridge out near San Francisco. And then also thinking about ways in which a style or a theme can be introduced into these forms. And one of the styles that we talked about during the last meeting was the Art Deco style and the importance that that style has played in the history of Lafayette. And that certainly has been introduced into bridge forms, the most significant of which is the Golden Gate Bridge with its wonderful kind of Art Deco towers with that kind of stair-stepped form that creates that Art Deco signature for that structure. But then also, you know, many very significant historical buildings have used that same kind of style or application. And then also lighting, think a little bit differently about lighting and looking at maybe creating a constellation of lights. So instead of sculpturally washing a structural component, we can actually use lights as points of light that go together to form these kinds of grids or constellations that can change at night. And so what might that look like? Well, here we have a self-anchored suspension bridge with very large vertical pylons. You can see that we've used that kind of Art Deco influence to begin to change the forms of those vertical towers slightly. And then the towers and catenary cable are connected to the deck with these diagonal hangers, which are referred to as a network cable system. So again, you can see in this case, unlike the pylon bridge and the previous cable bridge that had a little bit of a shorter profile for the towers, these have very tall soaring towers for the main pylons. But again, because these are signature bridge features that are applied to that conventional structure, you do still see this array of columns underneath the bridge. However, these do have very generous spans. So we're talking about approximately 185 feet of horizontal clearance between the support piers for the bridge. And then a very kind of majestic sort of experience as you're traveling along the roadway, going through the main towers of the suspension bridge. And here's that constellation of lights. So we can take that network of cables, and there's wonderful LED lighting technology that allows us to create a point light at each one of the intersections of those network cables. And then we've also got some luminous kind of glowing light fixtures at the tops of the pylons, so that we can really begin to create this, again, I call it a constellation or network of lights. And you can imagine then at night, the things that we can do, not only when rendered in white, but also if we look at introducing color, so that now we're drawing in different seasons, different festivities or activities that might be happening within the community, and allowing that to influence the lighting system. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric and let him talk about the more complex signature bridge options. Let's see, Eric, you're muted.
Hold on, give us 1 second.
Oh, there you go. Oh, nope.
I'm now unmuted.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Bradley. I think it's very exciting to talk about a signature and true signature bridge structure now, and we have two options today to present to you. And I think we need to remind ourselves, why are we talking about a signature structure today? First, we want to create an identifier landmark, and that's very important for the community. Secondly, we want to create a gateway, and it needs to be strong as such. And then thirdly, which I think is a big differentiator to what we've seen today, is we want to remove that forest of columns underneath the structure to really create a truly unique community space underneath a signature element and structure, which gives a new identity to the community. And this can only be achieved if we make that structure do actually something. So what we've seen before were conventional bridges, and then we added to it some signature features which mimic the signature bridge structure, but they actually didn't do anything structurally. So here you see the first one, which is the single arch bridge, which I believe is doing an enormous job. It's a very effective signature structure. It's a strong icon. It's majestic, it's simple, it's stunning. And it creates, in a way, a double gateway, as you can see in the bottom image. It's basically straddles across the lower road and the upper deck road. So it really gives us the opportunity to create this dual gateway with one structure. And it also creates a kind of a beautiful kind of, if you look at it, sculpture of cables. It's an array of cables. When we look at it from the front, as you see in the left corner with illumination, it really, sorry, could you go back, please?
Sorry about that.
It really gives us the kind of feel of the bellows we see from Accordia, which is so significant for that culture we have in the region. And on the other hand, when you look at it in elevation, it feels in a way like, it's starting to become kinetic. And if you now move on to the next kind of images in constellation, you can see that from every different angle, the cables are creating a very beautiful sculptural appearance. And if we now move on just to the other images, you can see that from different viewpoints, it's very kinetic and it's just very striking. And that's a view basically looking on the lower level, where you see now how on the upper level it creates a gateway, but on the lower level it opens up the space. If we just move to the next one. And as people move through that structure and around it, it just keeps changing its formation. And it's a very strong icon and significant kind of structure for Lafayette. And if you look at the space underneath, you can see that we opened it up. We have obviously still the supports on the outer side, but all of the columns in the central part underneath the bridge, we could eliminate through the use of the cables, because the cables take the forces and the loads from the bridge structure center and brings it up into the arch. And the arch does a lot of structural work whilst being an icon and a gateway on both levels. We now move on. That's another view on the top. And with that, we're going to the double arch structure. The double arch structure is an alternative, and you can see it is very graceful. It is in a way reminding us of a pelican when it, in a way opens up its wings. But on the other hand, it allows us in this case to even remove the columns we had on the outer side in the arch bridge, in the single arch bridge. It gives us now the opportunity of a completely column-free space. And on the right side, you can see two images, two impressions. One during the day, how you can have activities underneath, and during the night, how we can also with light introduce here a very interesting communal space. And this one, compared to the single arch, is requiring a bit more effort because we need here basically 3 rows of double arches to make that work. And compared to the single arch, it is definitely a more, complex or more costly also solution. So compared with the single arch, we have here 3 of them, and they basically carrying then the loads of the decks across. And if you move on, we can see how the sculptural kind of qualities of that structure become alive when you look at it from different angles, because through the effect of having 3 rows of them, they appear always in a different kind of constellation, and they create a kind of an abstract sculpture quality. And if you just move on through the images, you can see how the space is open underneath, and we have this continuity from one side to the other side. And we have a complete column-free space underneath. That's now a view on the upper deck when we're driving through it. In this case, we're not driving through a gateway as such. We're driving along basically these structures. So the single arch in that respect is much more impressive and iconic. We move on to the next one. This is the view at night where we have here Johnson Street, and it's a very graceful structure and beautiful. It's very sculptural. We move on to the next couple of images. You see it on the upper deck now when we're passing through it in a bit more of a close-up view. It's almost like undulating, and you're following these kind of arches across the deck. We move to the next one. I think with that, we're coming into the bridge evaluation.
Awesome. Thank you, Bradley. And thank you, Eric. It is awesome. I think it's great that you're able to share really a wide range of signature feature bridge options. And you saw that starting from option 1 to option 5 with the arches. But the next step of our team that we had in front of us is how we're going to evaluate these. What are we going to look at when we start evaluating signature feature bridges? We're going to look at the cost or the cost premium. I'll talk about that in a minute here. And we're also going to look at how, the impacts to traffic, as well as the impacts to inspection and maintenance. And those are more conventional items. And then lastly, we're going to look at really the aesthetics and try to evaluate them from aesthetics. And that's really where we're going to need your help, because it is really important when you talk about signature feature bridges, is how they look and what they mean to you and what do they mean to the community. And so we want to make sure that we capture that input from you as we move forward into our design. So I'm going to talk about each of these 4 options or these alternative criteria, and we'll start with the cost premium. So what you see in the table is what we're calling the cost premium. So we have 5 options: pylon, cable, all the way through double arch. And we see that these costs, these premium costs, these are the costs that are estimated to be above and beyond what it would cost to build a conventional bridge, right? For the Lafayette Johnson Street crossing, right, we're going to be building mainline bridges there. We've already determined that. Well, if we take that one step further and add some signature features to it, we can add signature features to that conventional bridge in the first 3 options at a more affordable price, as you can see there. And then likewise, when you get into the next options, the single and double arch, those premium costs are a little bit more, right, than they would be for the conventional, because those conventionals are faux bridges that provide a really good appearance of what a signature bridge would look like. And so that's how we evaluate. So when you hear the word premium, it's really the additional costs And that's really, again, I need to stress that it's at the Johnson Street only. So I'll circle back at the end to tell you a little bit more about that means, maybe at a different location. So we also, let's go to the next criteria. We also talked about the maintenance of traffic. Maintenance of traffic, of course, we got to worry about which options reduce roadway closures, which options require a reduced construction footprint. Some of these structures can be built easier and have less MOT impacts. And it's important because really, the first three options being more conventional and have more conventional components can be built a little bit easier than the second, or I should say the fourth and fifth option, which add more complexity to the structure and add more impacts to the maintenance of traffic. And let's go to the next slide. And likewise, when we talk about bridge, and I'm sorry, this is how we evaluated each of those criteria, these 4 sub-criteria. And like I mentioned, with the first 3 options, they reduce the closures, as you can see here with the green dots. And likewise with the arches, they have more formwork and a little bit more closures. And so they didn't score as well from a qualitative standpoint. And so, so that's how it fares from a traffic standpoint. From an inspection and maintenance standpoint, what do we think about? Let's go to the next slide. We're thinking about, the materials and the construction methods that are used to build these bridges, and are special inspections required? And do these bridges have established maintenance plans? So we want to consider that in these 5 options because some of the bridges might have a little bit more inspection requirements due to the complexity of the structure. But, as you can see here, it's been done before, and we've been doing that for many years. The technology associated with the cables that Bradley had mentioned have come so far to provide that 75 and 100-year design life. So we want to make sure that we provide those kind of options to you and those components that make your structure durable. And let's go to the next slide. And you can see how it's scored. And like I mentioned about the specialty inspection, that both the arches will require a little bit more inspection, right? However, they look different. They look better in one person's view. They have established, preventive maintenance plans for the more conventional bridges, right? And so that's why they scored as well as they do. So, and let's get to the last criteria, and that's really the aesthetics. And here we're talking about, is the concept pleasing? You saw 5 options. Do these concepts maximize the space between piers to create that openness? That's an important thing. Does it provide a positive impact? And does the structure age well? And also expand opportunities. So we want to make sure that these options all check the box of these things. And if you go into the next slide, you can see that they do all check the box, so to speak. But one thing of note, and Eric mentioned it earlier, the fourth and fifth option, the arch options, provide a much bigger space. You can see, as shown in this table, there's up to about a 500-foot, 550-foot span between columns associated with the single arch, and about 475 for the double arch. That opens up, whereas the conventional bridges are more limited to conventional structure types, which is we're maxing out about 185 feet. And so that's how we looked at it from an evaluation standpoint. But I think the best thing to do is really just to take a look at it. And Bradley's going to walk you through our open house virtual room to share with you what that would look like. And of course, you'll be able to do that when we provide that link to you at the end of this presentation. So Bradley, take it away.
Okay, so we have created we've taken the virtual meeting space that we created for the last workshop, and we've added to that all of these bridge concept options. And so let me go back to that for a second so you can see what I did. So if you are panning around the model, and we're going to send you again the link to this, you'll see this icon here that says Bridge Design Concepts. And if you click on that, it brings you to this kind of sub-menu where we've got all of the images for the different bridge concepts, as well as some 360 VR files that allow you to rotate around. So if we look first at some of the still images, like if you're here down on the ground east of the structure, just right there near Johnston Street, and there'll be a menu of items over here on the right-hand side that allow you to page through each one of the different options, from the pylon bridge to the cable bridge to the suspension bridge, both daytime and nighttime. So you can get a sense of what the lighting opportunities might be for each one of these different concepts. And we encourage you to spend some time with these, really, look at them, think about them, and in preparation for that meeting next week when we have the breakout sessions, because we really do want your input. We really want to hear what you have to say about all of these different things. So similarly, if we look at these from the roadway perspective, again, daytime and nighttime, because it's equally important that we create a meaningful experience, not only at the ground level, but also at the mainline level as well. Because as Eric mentioned, we really do want this to become a bi-directional gateway. So it's a gateway for all different kinds of users and different user modalities that are going to exist around these structures. And then if you click on this little rotating 360-degree panoramic icon, we've actually got some 360-degree panoramic views. You just click with the mouse and pan around, and it really does allow you to see. You can also use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out of the image. And I'll just take you through each one of these. And so you can really get a sense of what that space is, and also the relative height of these things. These pylons are fairly significant structural elements. And so I think it's important that everyone get a sense of scale, and then how that then compares with something like the suspension bridge option. And you can pan around again and see the kinds of spaces in and around the structure. And also compare, the kind of space that might be created underneath the bridge with the signature feature bridges, where we've taken that mainline structure and maintained that array of columns underneath, and then supplemented that with the signature bridge elements, which in this case of the signature are the suspension bridge, and compare that with the more complex solutions that eliminate that array of columns underneath the structure and open up those spaces even further. And then again, the double arch solution. So it really is I think this is going to be a great tool for you all to use to explore these different concepts and really get a sense of, what they're all about. And I think
Awesome.
Go back to
Thank you, Bradley.
Yep.
So Bradley, I'm going to ask you, if you could please, is to go back to slide 5. And that's where we had our Design Workshop 1 review. And the reason why I do that is because I said how we're going to devote some time really to get some feedback from you, and maybe some discussion on any questions that you have about Design Workshop 1. And so, Bree, I guess I'm going to open it up to questions with regards to the content of the first workshop. And we can maybe have some dialogue about that now.
Okay, we have quite a few questions. I'm going to go through the chat. They may not all be specific to workshop number 1, but I think it's important that we get through these because there are a lot of good questions. The first question is from Samuel Oliver. What's the importance of Art Deco to Lafayette? I see Tom Salmons answered the old City Hall is Art Deco, but I didn't know if anybody else wanted to talk about that statement that was made, I think, at the last meetings.
And help me out, wasn't that part of our breakout discussion? And I don't know if any of our LCP members remember that discussion when we had that back in end of July.
Yeah, it was brought up specifically during workshop number 1. And I will say this, I wanted to show how the Art Deco theme might influence the design of a bridge. And so I randomly picked the suspension bridge to do that. And I think it's a good example of maybe Art Deco is not the appropriate thing, but other stylistic themes or stylistic ideas can help shape these bridge forms. And so not only are we interested in what your thoughts are regarding the overall structural shape, but then also other elements, styles, ideas, design concepts that you would like to see us bring into and the designs in order to refine them and really give them an even greater sense of kind of depth and complexity.
And I don't see Samuel in the list of participants right now, so I don't know if he's on still. If anybody else has anything that they want to add about about that, please send it in the chat and I'll unmute you. We'll move on to the next question from Matthew Holland. Do the cable and suspension designs actually provide any structural significance, or are they ornamental only?
Only on 4 and 5, they do structurally something. They allow us basically remove the columns. On the other structures, they are purely decorative and fake or forced structures. They basically mimic a signature bridge, but they are not doing anything structurally. So only on option 4 and 5, we have a real kind of case where the cables take loads and help us to illuminate and free up the columns and free up the space underneath.
And the reason for that is that we did want to we wanted to show a progression of not only design concepts, but also cost premiums. And so there is some cost benefit to using the structure of that mainline conventional bridge system.
Matthew, did that answer your question?
Yes, it answered that question. I think I have a few more.
Okay.
I'll try to be democratic and let you go down the list.
Okay, thank you. We'll get to them. I think this is the question on everybody's mind, and Samuel and Matthew, you both had the same question. I feel like the last meeting summary stated something about the minimum height of the full span being satisfactory at 22. Can we return to that item? And then Matthew says, yes, please. I was wondering the same thing. I never heard anyone in the meeting say they were satisfied with 22.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm glad Brad went back to the previous slide, but and you can still do this, right? You can get back to this site on the i49vr.com and go into the spot that shows you standing on the ground what it looks like if it's a 22-foot vertical clearance versus a 30-foot. And the reason why 22-foot is significant is because that was, if I'm not mistaken, was part of the ROD requirement to have a higher vertical clearance for this structure. And so that's why we did what we did. And some of the input that we've gotten so far was anywhere as 22 foot's high enough. I'm not sure where that's going to land, but at least that's the initial input that we've gotten so far from the group.
And I will say that the conversation that we had during our breakout session that I was involved in the last workshop surprised me, honestly, that there was some pushback over the higher structures, primarily because of the fact that it lengthens the ramps. And so the walls get bigger, the ramps get more complex, and it introduces a level of geometric massiveness that was not considered attractive, but there's certainly some benefits to it as well. So like Gary said, I mean, this is an ongoing conversation, and we certainly welcome your input.
Okay. It looks like another question just came up about 22. So I'm going to read that one first, if you don't mind. It looks like Charles Bull says the 22-foot vertical clearance was presented at the previous meeting in relation to the viaduct. I don't recall the height discussion touching on that height as it relates to a signature bridge.
I can answer it, and it's one and the same. As you recall, at least in this presentation, we've located the signature bridge within the mainline viaduct. And it's one of 4 option locations that we've considered. And we've done it in a place where the vertical clearance is 22 feet. Doesn't need to be higher, and we'll accommodate that as we move forward into the design. So I guess that's a simple response.
Okay, Charles, I just unmuted you. I think the next one is.
Yeah, wait, I have a comment regarding that, Gary.
Thanks.
In the previous iteration of the CSS process, when we were the CWG and all that, the signature bridge option was largely discussed with 2 main benefits, both of which are largely ignored in the presentation today. It was presented as an opportunity to raise the mainline height as it goes to the urban core, and it was also presented as a way to minimize the number of piers. And that, you know, last week or last month, the last presentation, we discussed 22 as it related to the viaduct, but now that we're discussing the signature bridge, I think it's important to revisit the whole purpose of having a signature bridge wasn't simply aesthetic. It was largely to allow us to raise the height to minimize impacts underneath, both visually and in the actual footprint of the bridge. And, you know, like was just presented, most of the signature bridge designs are ornamental only. A couple of them are functional, but the height and the pier structure was directly related to the reasoning behind the signature bridge in the previous discussions. And that's all I have to say on that.
You know, Charles, you're right. And one thing that, and you probably know better than I, but the previous series of meetings that were held with a different horizontal alignment of I-49. And we had bridge alignments over 2nd and 3rd Streets, I believe, and maybe another location that resulted in longer span requirements. And those longer span requirements kind of, I guess, led the team to talk about, you know, signature bridges as an opportunity. And I guess to answer the second part of your question, as far as reduce the number of piers, you know, I think, you know, we've been able to provide that option here today in options 4 and 5 to do reduce the number of piers. But as far as to raise the height, you know, I guess I don't know, I can't really speak to that. I don't know if there's someone on our team that can have that kind of background on that particular application. And we might have to get back to you on that, Charles.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, it wasn't necessarily to raise the height. It was a handful of things as far as a signature feature bridge. So some people may want something higher. Some people may want something not quite as high.
Okay.
Right, Gary, this is Steve Wallace. Just to add to that, the height question, whether it's 22 or 30 or whatever in between, is still an open question. And so we'd love to get your input on that. And what we thought we heard at the last meeting was that more people being more comfortable with the 22 rather than higher. And as it relates to a signature bridge could be 22 or 30 as well. And so the two aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. They can go together. Just to add that.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Let's see, I'm gonna just skip Sam's question real quick and go down to Stephen Periotti. I too was surprised to hear that you all heard 22 feet was satisfactory. I was also surprised that natural material was what was preferred, because I heard several comments about how Louisiana does not have natural materials that an abutment would be constructed. I also believe it was stated in the first meeting that Lafayette would be on the hook to pay for the signature. Is that true? And I think that goes back to Samuel's question as well about, is any version of signature feature bridge option considered an enhancement that would be outside of DOTD's budget and for the local authority to pay for? I think that's important to know going into any cost comparison. So can you touch on that, please, Gary?
Sure, I'll touch on the first few items, and that's in regards to the structure imagery, the texture, and the options that were presented for the walls and for the abutments. And yeah, the initial read was there was an initial preference, for the natural, but we're not sure where that's going to land, right? And that topic is still open to discussion. As we've mentioned before, we're not going to stop taking Design Workshop 1 questions, anytime soon. We'll keep incorporating that into our evolving CSS process. So stay tuned, right? We do want to address that. And we did talk about the height. We heard pros both for and against the increased height. And again, it's not a decision. Nothing's final here. This was just some of the initial information that we've gotten had spoke to the 22 feet as being an initial preference. And I might add that a conventional structure built anywhere around the United States has a minimum vertical clearance of about 16 to 17 feet. So federal requirements mandate a structure height in that range, whereas we are through the ROD providing an increased height to 22 as a starting point. So, and in regards to the last question about the enhancement costs, I think that is still under consideration. And I know that Tim has been thinking about that answer for a long time and how best to address that.
Gary, is it worth, or can it be mentioned what the premium is compared to the overall cost for what we're looking at here at the moment? Because then people get an understanding what this is in relation to the overall cost of the.
It's a good point. It's a good point now. You heard the premium costs and ranging anywhere from $6 million to 30-some million dollars. And Tim would know better. And I know that the program cost, is over $1 billion. And I don't know, Steve Wallace, if you know that, there's not an exact number at this time, but to get back to the enhancement, costs, I think, that's something that DOTD has been considering ever since we got started on this topic. So I don't know, Tim, you want to provide maybe and try to address some of that question?
Yeah, I mean, right now we don't have all, as we're gathering input on the project, we don't have all what people are thinking and what they like, what they dislike. We don't have complete project funding yet. We don't even have a preferred alternative yet. So as we get funding, we have to find funding for the project overall, and also look at what kind of input we got from the community on what everybody's preferences were. Consider that, and then I'm sure there's going to be local participation in the enhancement portions, whether it's the signature bridge or specialty lighting or something. We're still formulating that as we're moving along. But right now, I couldn't tell you. I would guess that some of the major features that are enhancements above and beyond what's required for mitigation or for structural requirements, a good portion of that I would assume would be a local or group of local costs associated with that. Typically on projects, DOT, we do some enhancements. We're doing that on Loyola Interchange right now. We are spending a little bit on some landscaping, on some aesthetics, on the columns, and on the sound walls. So that's what we're doing on Loyola. As we move along through here, we'll see what budget we have. But we don't have all the information yet, but I would suspect that some of these significant costs would require some local participation. But if you don't look at them and you don't see what's out there, you won't have anything to start with, to run with.
Thank you. Bree, is there others?
There are.
We have plenty
Let's
of
see.
time.
Is the signature bridge a required element of the connector? Where did the emphasis on this come from?
Okay. I guess the simple answer is no, it's not a requirement. And I don't know if John McNamara is on the line, at one of our task leads for the context sensitive process. You want to maybe provide a little more elaboration on the history?
No, the signature bridge was not necessarily a requirement of the I-49 Lafayette connector. How it evolved was all the way back into the late 1990s, 1998, 1999, when the project was really in its infancy, and the university was involved and created the Blue Book. There was a whole discussion of how the entire corridor could be an enhancement. It needed to be an enhancement to the communities alongside of it. And at certain nodal points, there could be features that had benefits and provided certain mitigation, you might say, towards to the adjacent neighborhoods. And that ranged from design to art integration to cultural integration to joint use development, all the things that really will be covered in these 6 CSS workshops. Then after the court case in the early 2000s, and even though the project was determined that it had followed NEPA requirements, which was the argument in the court case, the judge involved and others at the federal level made it very clear that going forward, if the project was going to move forward, it needed to be much more responsive to the community and the stakeholders, and suggested that a CSS approach be utilized, and that CSS approach really looks strongly at contextual kinds of issues and what kinds of enhancements could be worked into the project moving forward. And then in the 2006, 7, and 8 timeframe, when the former consultant team that was working on the project at the time started the CSS process, the concept of a signature bridge evolved as a potential major feature that would kind of provide a placemaking feature to the center core of the project, adjacent to the downtown somewhere. And of course, you heard earlier that that could have been at the 2nd and 3rd Street large interchange footprint that was envisioned at the time. And so there was a number of effort spent on the concept of a signature bridge back at that point in time. And then of course the project went on hold in about 2007. And when it was resurrected and the LCP team was selected in 2015, the direction that we received was that it would be very appropriate to pick up the CSS process and carry it forward. So that's how Signature Bridge moved from the early 2000s, well, actually from the concept of signature elements, you might say, moved from the late 1990s to Signature Bridge in the early 2000s to now, this effort forward. But it was not a mandated requirement. It was not stipulated in the ROD. It was just a package of design enhancements that were beginning to be looked at in the early 2000s as enhancements that would offset potential impacts.
Thanks, John.
Okay, I'm going to go back up. Charles had a question.
Can I comment on that for a second?
Yes, sorry.
I just it seems to me that we're spending a lot of time and effort focusing on an idea that we've been carrying this torch for over 20 years now of this signature bridge, and I don't think anybody's really been thinking about whether it's even necessary or not, and what it means to the community of people that this connector is going to pass through. I mean, I'm sure you're all aware by now that the Evangeline corridor, it represents a racial divide in our city, a demographic divide, a cultural divide, and for a lot of people, this roadway is symbolic of a lot of the issues and problems that we have in our community, which are, if you're paying any attention to the news right now, is like at the forefront of our conversation in Lafayette. To me, it seems like this signature bridge is a cherry on top of a pile of something that most of the people in the city have expressed that they don't really want to see in the first place. It just seems to me that if we're going to put some money into something, maybe we can mitigate the social effects of this roadway on the community that it passes through, rather than putting a fancy bridge up that's going to cost millions of extra dollars.
All right, that's good input.
And like, this comes back to this whole process, the 22-foot height. Like, these things have been presented as like these established ideas that we need to pick from a set of options around them. But, you know, where was the input on establishing these ideas, and where did it come from? Did it come from our community? It seems to me, I wasn't involved in some of the initial conversations back in 2016 and earlier, but the way it seems to me is like we're presented a set of options, but we didn't have any say in the options that we were presented.
Well, you did actually.
Yeah, we're glad the 22-foot came from the original rod. It was a mitigation for height or clearance requirements that came from the original environmental document. And so, you know, typical heights are about 16.5 feet. So to help address the need that the people shown to mitigate that, in the grades, they showed about 22 foot. And that's where we started on as far as an extra or enhancement to the project, is to raise it, to give it more daylight, and then try not to raise it too high where you start having visual impacts to the other parts of the community and such. And so we've had multiple meetings where we've had input from people liking 22 feet or wanting less or wanting 30-something feet. And so we're gathering all that input and taking that into consideration as we refine the alternatives. And that's kind of where we're at today.
Okay, thank you. We have some more time. I'm going to go through some more questions. I'm going back up to Charles Bull. The MOA included in the FEIS stipulates that the mitigation plan will take into account that down lighting should be considered and given priority as appropriate on all lighting installations. Was this taken into consideration when designing the light features that are being presented along with these bridge options? Which of these bridge options allows for a reduced number of piers?
With regards to the downlighting, Charles, that is part of the LCP scopes. And that'll be part of what we'll be looking at later on in our design process. Currently, the lights that you see are basically options or ideas that are generated for the signature bridge. But in regards to viaduct lighting, lighting for safety and so forth, that will be evaluated later in our design process, as we move, further into the process. So we will have to consider that and what kind of impacts it does have.
And if I can add to that, Gary, typically on a project like this, we pay very careful attention to the roadway lighting, because it really represents a massive amount of light that can get reflected and create dark sky issues. And so we really want to be sympathetic to that. And similarly with signature bridge illumination, aesthetic lighting, we want to be very careful that we're using enough light to create an effect, but not so much light that we're just blasting. You know, it used to be the way this was approached was you would just blast floodlights up into the sky. And that's absolutely something that we avoid. So as the design develops, there are a lot of things that we can do that can create a wonderful kind of aesthetic signature, but that are also very sympathetic to issues like dark sky, issues like wildlife habitation, view shed disruption. We've got an airport close by, so we've also got to be sympathetic to that. So there are a lot of things that will fold into the equation as we start developing, as concepts begin to emerge.
And I appreciate that there are various, things that can be done to mitigate the impacts. I guess my main concern that I even thought to mention it is because, well, one, it's a, visual impacts and sound and noise pollution and light pollution, or, concerns of mine living as being that I live close to the corridor. But it's also that when y'all presented options that specifically go against a signed MOA that y'all have in the FEIS, and then going back also with the height, y'all not including, not referencing the discussions that y'all used in order to help us select this particular alternative in 2016 and 2017. If y'all aren't referring back to the past materials for the arguments y'all made to lead us to agree to things or to select certain options, but then y'all hold us to the options that somebody else selected in a past administration, but y'all don't take into consideration the arguments that were made to get us to go along with that, I think that's somewhat disingenuous. So the fact that y'all presented uplighting options on the cable stayed elements leads me to think that y'all just ignored an agreement that y'all made in the MOA, but yet y'all are holding us to the fact that the MOA exists and the ROD exists and the FEIS exists. But specific things that y'all agreed to at that time, y'all are now presenting things ignoring the fact that y'all did it. And that's my concern, specifically related to lighting, because people agree to things regarding height based on other factors that y'all bring into the argument. And then to say, well, we never presented 22 feet, or we never agreed to down lighting only, and then presenting options with uplighting that lights up the whole night sky for 5 miles in relation to the project. People wouldn't agree to that if they knew that that's what was going to get presented later down the line.
So any agreements or commitments or contracts we have on this project, we have to adhere to. So we're always going to adhere to the agreements we have in place, commitments. As far as the process, we're gathering input from the public and the community and the stakeholders and this group here and the previous groups. We're gathering input. It's not like saying you chose this or you chose that. It's just based on the input we received. This is where we are today. So this is an input gathering thing along this process.
And also, Tim, I think to that point, one of the things that we're trying to do is lay out in front of you what we think is a broad array of opportunities, and none of which may be your preference. And that's something that we want to hear too. If you tell us, what, we don't want a signature bridge, or if we say we want a beautiful signature bridge, but no one in the community around it wants any lighting on it whatsoever at night, that's all very meaningful input that will help form the final design of this thing. So these are not considered, do you like this or do you like that? And we're certainly not trying to force feed any ideas to anyone, but instead it's very difficult to respond to ideas that without anything on the table. And so what we're trying to do is lay as many things on the table as we can to get your input. Do we want, to sacrifice, let's talk about signature bridges for a second. And, we had a long conversation about this idea of cost, and do we want to bring to the table concepts that are not structural in nature but create that visual impact of some of the first three concepts. It could be something that we as a group decide is not worth pursuing at all, but I don't think it would be fair for us not to bring that forth and get your thoughts on it. So that's really where we are right now. As Tim said, we're really in a fact-finding mode right now. We're not trying to sell you on anything.
Okay, I think we just have a few more minutes, and I'm going to try to go through a little more of these. And Fontenot says there are more mid-century modern than Art Deco, and I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but I'll unmute you if you wanted to.
Someone had asked why they were saying that it was a signature feature of Lafayette to say Art Deco, and I'm sure there are some, like you mentioned, you gave an example, but I guess percentage-wise, I was just mentioning that there are more mid-century modern, and then it is equal, probably, I don't know how many extant, but as many traditional, so to speak, architectural, as well as a lot of ranch style, but that's not super relevant to our conversation.
Well, and I think it's very relevant. And I think that, do we want to allow something like, mid-century modern to influence what we're doing, or do we want to go with something which is much more, forward thinking of, picking a theme like, contemporary minimalism as a style that might express where we see the community moving forward. So I think all of that kind of stuff is incredibly important.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, Anita Begno, can the data referenced be shared with the group? I'd like to understand how many participants responded and be able to analyze responses.
Well, sure. I guess the data in regards to the feedback forms, or I guess, what would you think, Bri?
Yeah, I can unmute, hold on. I believe that's what she means. There you go, Anita. Is that what you want, the feedback forms?
Yeah, hey Gary, I was unable to attend the last workshop when this was discussed, but I appreciate the opportunity to give feedback in the PDF. So I was just curious, when we look at page 4 where we voted, I guess you could say, on superstructure height feedback, what the responses from this group was, what the amount of people who responded was, just so we can kind of see where it's coming from, because I represent an organization that has to go back and give stakeholders feedback from these discussions, and to hear things like, most folks were okay with 22 feet. I need to understand what that means.
Okay, that's a good question. So yes, I would think that, Bri, I guess I'll let you figure out when and where to share the results. As part of the breakout sessions that I referred to on the 30th of July, we had 6 different groups that basically answered a series of questions, and each of the groups reported back to the whole committee as a combined session, if you will. And they were given a choice of questions and things to respond on. And I'll just go through them really quick, but the mainline structure type, the different pier types, what do you like, what you don't like, superstructure height. So we went through all those things that I kind of shared, but if I were just to read through some of the quotes that were written as part of those, and I'll just go down through a few of them, but here's one that says the 22-foot clearance is high enough to meet the above standards. The 30-foot clearance would intrude on the surrounding neighborhoods from a visibility standpoint. So that was a comment that was received. And then also, what are the costs for the additional 8-foot columns associated with a 22-foot versus a 30-foot structure? And we shared that with the team in our presentation. It was roughly about $10 to $15 million of additional costs. However, it says the 30-foot height does create more space, but what's the cost? So Anita, there's a lot of these kind of comments for all the different structural components. And I could go on, but I guess please, if you don't have one already, get that feedback form from Design Workshop 1 and take it back to your constituents so you can get that input.
Thank you. And I do want to just reiterate that that's why it's so important to participate in these workshops. This is just one way to give feedback. The LCAG is just one way. We will be having neighborhood meetings. There will be public meetings. But, you know, we're trying to increase participation in these LCAG meetings, and these feedback forums are important to give that feedback. But again, not the only feedback that we are receiving throughout the process. Anita, I'm going to keep you off of mute because you said, I think folks want to understand if we're spending all of this time as part of the design process to discuss options far outside our local community's ability to pay for them, ability and willingness. I don't know if you had a question or if you just wanted to state that.
Hey, Bree, yeah, I'd like to provide a little bit of clarity. So Tim's heard me mention this in the past, and Jeff was also in the meeting at One Acadiana when I brought this up before. And I understand that there's a process to this and there's steps that we have to take, but you know, it's interesting that we're spending hours of time talking about a bridge that this group doesn't have any certainty that there's the political will to fund or to advocate and champion for, because, you know, I've been involved in this conversation for a while, and there are others on this list who have certainly spent a lot more time on this than I have. But it feels like a lot of conversation about something I have no certainty about. I think that's where some of that rub comes from is, you know, we just don't know that. When I saw the costs today, which is something I wanted to see for a long time, so I appreciate you guys sharing, you know, the different levels of millions that it would take to get to the visuals that we see. I have no idea if the mayor president, if the council is willing to inject that kind of revenue into a project like this. And so it just, I don't know, it feels weird to keep talking about it without that certainty.
Oh, Gary, you're on
Gary,
mute. Hold
you're
on.
mute.
There you go.
So I thank you, Anita, for that comment. We were very sympathetic, which is why we talked about signature features, why we talked about a range, right, of options to look at. But also as part of this presentation that you'll get to be a part of here, the second half, we're gonna be talking about gateway elements, which also provide, you know, an opportunity for enhancements along the corridor. You know, it doesn't have to be on the bridge. You know, I'm a bridge person. I might want it on the bridge, but it doesn't really matter. It's really what's best for the community. And so we're trying to present a lot of different and a range of options to provide that type of, you know, I guess, palette of things for the team and the community to consider. So anyway, I think that's what I can say at this point.
Okay, let's go. We'll have one more question from Brett Mellington. Can there be multiple heights, especially for the bridge?
I guess the alignment of the structure of the main line really is going to set the height of the bridge viaduct. And as you saw in some of the options that were presented, some of the structures went much higher than the deck height. They don't have to go that high. You saw in Eric's option 5 how the arches were more subtle and not much higher above the deck, but provide that really, you know, opportunity, you know, for as an option to consider. So, you know, as far as the signature feature height, that is something that can be adjusted to best fit really what works in the community. I don't know, Bradley, you want to expand a little bit on that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that if it's determined that there's a specific and compelling, you know, use in a particular area to change the height, we can certainly explore ways to accommodate that. We're also, you know, there's a lot of moving pieces in terms of ramps and connections and all those sorts of things that we'll also have to take into consideration. So I don't think any idea is beyond consideration right now.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next section. We'll have another question and answer for any of the ones that we missed or we need to get to that just came in.
There we go. We'll go back one.
Sorry.
Okay. And Mr. Grobe, you are unmuted.
Well, I am now.
There you go.
Hi, Bree.
Hi.
Gateway 101 is sort of like an adjunct sidebar conversation to Bridge 101. And this afternoon, evening, we're going to talk about a little bit more detail about what are gateways and why would you want to have one. I think I'd like to just step aside for a second and mention a couple of things. This is a huge project, and it's a once-in-a-lifetime project that is a community changer for multiple generations. And I read 2 Lafayette papers every day. I subscribe to the Advertiser and the Advocate. So I know what's going on in town, but we have to think long-term. We have to think 50, 80, maybe even 100 years about how a facility that's going to cost maybe $1 billion or more will look over time, and what can it do? What opportunities are there for community redevelopment via a public project of this size and scope? So when we talk about potential signature bridges, we'll talk about gateways for a minute. It's all part of a larger menu of things that you can only use a project of this size, scope, and scale to make happen. And these 6 workshops are a series of discussions to impart and discuss and gather information such that at the end of the process, we can have intelligent decisions that are best for the Lafayette community. We don't know what the answer is right now. I got to be frank with you. This is just a way of having this discussion on various topics that will have financial impacts, community impacts, visual impacts, cultural impacts, and all kinds of other ways of making Lafayette a better place and changing the face of Lafayette. So you heard about signature structures. I think that signature structures and gateways are intrinsically intertwined, because you could have a gateway as part of the bridge, and I'm going to talk about for a few minutes gateways that are not part of the bridge. But think about it. Let's say you're taking I-49 down from Shreveport and you're going down to ultimately New Orleans. And, you know, riding down the interstate, it's kind of the same thing hour after hour. What is it that we can do to identify Lafayette to the traveler if you're going along 49 for hour after hour? For instance, if you're going down I-90, or not I-90, just US 90. If you're going down to New Orleans on 90 and you come to the Hale Boggs Bridge, that thing's huge. And you know when you hit that thing that you're just about into New Orleans. So you got, you know, a couple more towns to go, but you're getting there. When you travel down 90 and you get to Morgan City and you see those railroad bridges to the left and right, you know you're in Morgan City, besides you're going over, you know, the river there as well. So things that are iconic, visual elements that break up the trip, visual elements that say, oh, I know where I am now. I'm just about before I get to New Orleans, or I'm in Morgan City. Things that identify place. And these are all aspects and methods and means to identify place. Now, what we're going to ask is, what kinds of things can we use to create place and iconic identifiers of community that speak the language of Lafayette? And y'all know much better than I, although I've been there lots of times and come there for years. I'm not a resident, you folks are, so we come to you for help. We come to you for helping us within various different venues of stuff, what are the possibilities that we can do this with, so that we've set an identifier out there that makes Lafayette a singular and unique experience for both the folks in town and folks just passing through. So this is a regional impact kind of thing, and we want to be able to establish Lafayette as a place, because this project is of such a size that we can use it to do this once in a lifetime, multi-generation opportunity. So we're going to talk about how do gateways function in the landscape. There's different types. There's arches, there's columns, there's sculptures. What options are there along the 49 corridor? I'm going to show you a few precedent examples of large-scale elements that function as gateways. And then finally, we're going to show you a couple of options that we've come up with up around the Willow Street area, just to get the ball rolling with some ideas. Next slide, please. So we're going back to school here. It's Gateway 101. We had Bridge 101. We're going to have Gateway 101. Sit back and enjoy the ride here. Shapes, types, and functions. So there's really three types of gateway types. There's arches, which you go through. There's columns, like were mentioned before, where you go between columns. And then there's finally, you can use sculpture, and you go beside it. So with these three shape types and functions, all of them do act as a gateway, because a gateway really suggests that you're entering into or leaving a place. And this is, again, all about making place. Let me show you a couple of options along some locations along the corridor that we've identified. And this is going to be one of the questions for your homework assignment. Where do you think a gateway might exist? For instance, if you're coming down 49 and you pass 10, there's really, is that a place where you now can say, well, yeah, now I'm in Lafayette? On bookending that, you're coming up what would be 49 from the south, and you get to just south of the airport. Is that a place for a gateway opportunity? Should the gateway really demarcate when you are adjacent to downtown? Or is there an opportunity if you're coming down 49 from the north at the Willow Street area? Is that a place that a gateway might work? Or are there other locations that we haven't thought of yet? Next slide, please. We also know that gateway elements can also dovetail quite nicely with the other CSS elements that Bradley has spoken to previously. So this really wants to be a holistic thought from a design point of view. Next slide. So these are going to go, we're going to have some fun here for a minute and look at all different kinds of images that gateway arches that you might know from around the world. Next, please. Here's a few you might know. The Brandenburg Gate is an arch. It says, it's in Berlin. You got Arc de Triomphe in Paris, but the gateway arch in St. Louis is the gateway to the west. And if there's anything that sends you through that arch to go out from the Mississippi out to California, that's it. There's a gateway statement if I ever saw it. Take the next slide, please. Gateways exist as arches, as gateways, for instance, over roadways in many places. The one there on the left, if you're coming into Ohio, for instance, says, welcome to Ohio. It's over an interstate. You can do that. There's other opportunities. I think the one on the right is in North Carolina, but it's a gateway. It's an arch statement over a multi-lane road that says you're coming into something. Next slide, please. You can have smaller arches over local roads. All of these say that you are at a place and you're going through it using an arch form to go through the arch from one side to the other. Next slide, please. This is a fun one, this bisected rainbow arch. I don't know where it is, but I just kind of like the picture of it. And arches can be literal arches or can be suggestive arches, like in the lower right where you're going through it, but that's not the Arc de Triomphe there on the lower right, but it certainly is an arch form in that you're going through it. Next, please. Another type that we mentioned were columns, where you go between the columns. And you saw earlier what Bradley and Eric were presenting, where you can have pylons and columns that you go between that demarcate the passage through and into a place or out of a place. And columns can set that plane that then becomes a gateway into or out of something. Next slide, please. So they can be columns, they can be architectural, formal, they can be mostly columns of light, but you're using a vertical element or a pair of vertical elements such that you pass between them and they become then your gateway statement. Next, please. Gateways, for instance, out of LAX airport, these are columns in the landscape that when you pass through these, you know you got to the airport. There's some other instances there where you're passing by the columns. They tell you that you've arrived at a place. Next, please. So, and then finally, there's a precedent for having sculpture in the landscape that says you're at a place. These are sculptures that when you are coming along the road and you pass by them, you know that, oh, I'm at so-and-so, I'm at this different place here. But it's not an arch and it's not necessarily a column, it's a thing. It's a thing in the landscape. And this gives you, next slide, probably the greatest opportunity to express with artistry, local culture expressed in form. So it can be abstract, it can be literal, but it's a large scale element in the landscape that demarcates a place, and it's referencing hopefully a cultural style or an expression. They can be tied to a bridge, or they can be simply exist in the landscape freestanding. Next slide. There's a few other last ones here. For instance, those pictures I took when I was out on a trip through South Dakota, and you're driving along Interstate 80 or 90 you're on, and you see this massive steerhead over off to the side there. You know that you got to this point, I forget where it was, but you were in, if you travel this way a lot, you know where you are when you go by this thing. And you can use animal forms, they can be whimsical. You can have literal expressions of things, but a sculptural element in the landscape can create a gateway because you're going beside it and it's a demarcator in the landscape. Next slide, please. So we had some thoughts. We came up with a couple of simple ideas of what we could do with the gateway types using the forms that we just talked about, columns and arches and sculptures. And let's try something out here at Willow. So we're looking at the fleur-de-lis as an inspiration starting point. We thought that we could, in plan view, if you were to take columns and array them using the fleur-de-lis as your inspiration, you might see something like this, where you have a series of columns. You're standing on Willow there. There's the main line in front of you. But an array of columns in the landscape, using in plan view, the fleur-de-lis as your starting point, you might come up with something like that. And they could be lit, they could be not lit, they could, but if you're coming down 49 and you pass that, it'll suggest to you where you might, that you're someplace. If you're going to use an arch form, say we took the crawfish as our inspiration, and you look at that thing in plan view, you take using a gateway, using an arch as your form, and you take the crawfish as your inspiration, you might express it something like this, where you have the form that is the tail there, and you're creating an arch over the road. Plus, in this case, you're creating an arch over Willow. So as it was happening in other slides you've seen, it's a gateway in two directions. It connects one side of Willow to the other side. You're coming down 49 and leaving on 49. You go by this, you know that this is a thing that's associated with Lafayette. Next slide. And then finally, one other one here we took as an inspiration, palm leaves, palm fronds. And if you look at those in plan view as well, you can express it just off to the side as a sculptural element that works both as seen from the I-49 main line and also seen from Willow below. And it's a large piece of sculpture in the landscape that acts as an iconic demarcator of place. Next slide, please. And finally, one more sculptural idea. You know, we've seen the button accordion before. I love them. And that can be interpreted hundreds of ways as a form. And here's just one idea that we came, you know, as Eric had used the bellows before. There's another way of doing it, just as a freestanding sculpture that expresses some cultural element and some cultural reference and expressed as a gateway sculptural element in the landscape. Next slide, please. So I'd like to take just a couple of minutes, and if there's any questions, how gateways function, what types there are. We're going to ask you a couple of questions to come back next week. This is going to be our topic of conversation. Where should a gateway to Lafayette be? You know, we have some ideas, but we'd like to really know what you think the gateway to Lafayette is. There's a couple of options we presented, and please let us know what you think. What type of gateways the different types that you saw would be most appropriate? Would it be an arch? Would it be a bunch of columns, or is it a sculptural piece? We're looking for feedback along those lines. Here's a big one. Should the gateway, if we have one, be a component of a bridge or the viaduct, or should it be freestanding? That's a big topic of conversation. As it was mentioned before, it could be associated with as part of a signature element of part of the bridge, or should it be a freestanding statement expression somewhere else? That's going to be a topic that we really want to hear you speak to. And if you were going to come up with a gateway element, what would you do? We've only scratched the surface. There's 1,000 ideas out there. We'd like to hear what y'all think. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to ask you to think about. And those are the kinds of things we're going to come back and talk about a week from tomorrow. And we hope to get some feedback after you've spoken to your peeps and see what they say. I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Jeff.
You bet.
Next
Any
slide,
questions?
please.
Any questions? Go ahead, Gar.
Hey, hi guys. Hey, I did talk about signature feature bridge locations. The documentation has identified different locations for this particular feature if they're to be incorporated, and those are shown on the upper left. The Genevieve Church, the gateway to downtown between 3rd and 6th Street, of course the core area, which is what we have shown currently at Johnson Street, and then over the Vermilion River. And I guess the important takeaway here is that 3 or 4 of these options are already part of what we're calling the mainline viaduct. And so we know that there's going to be a structure going from south to north within these areas. And so if there was an interest to provide some enhancement, to provide an opportunity for signature features, it would just be that additional cost, right? If we look at the Vermilion River Bridge, I think it's a little bit different story because we've just got a simple bridge, going across the river now and coming up with a signature bridge. It might have, I know it will have different premium costs. I don't know what those are, but for the purpose of our evaluation, we just did it for Johnson Street. So we'll go to the next slide, and that's one of our questions. And this is really where we're hoping to hear from you, and I know that we are, and this is great dialogue. We're going to provide another series of feedback forms. The feedback forms, I'll just share with you, there's going to be a feedback form for the 5 signature feature bridge options. How do you feel about these? Do they provide benefit? I think one of the better questions, I think. And maybe we can go to the next slide. I want to see what that last question was. The question of Bradley that we had in regards to the I guess the benefit cost ratio, and that's not the right word that we use, but I don't have that in front of me to know what that particular question was. But you know, it's important to understand how each of you feel about them. So in addition to that questions, we talked about the signature feature bridge location question. We'll have a question on that. Which ones, does it make sense to put one at one place over the other? And then lastly, like Jeff mentioned, there's a series of questions that were developed for the gateway features. And those are illustrated in that particular example that you see on the screen. But, you know, it's just really important to get that takeaway from you guys. And we can do that also through the breakout sessions, which are a week from Thursday. So, Bree, I think that pretty much concludes the content part of our discussion. I really enjoy the dialogue back and forth, and really the opportunity to talk to you about these and also get that input so we can move forward.
Thanks, Gary. We do have a couple other comments, questions that I want to read before we finish. Let's see. I know Charles had written in here regarding the signature bridge as a feature allowing for a height higher than 22 feet. I would ask that LCP please refer to the presentation from CWG number 11 on December 15th, 2016. We'll definitely make note of that. I'm going to go down to your next one. I don't think it's appropriate to present an idea with features that LCP has agreed to not include in the final project. And then you had one more. Let me just get to that one. What are the traffic noise differences between the signature bridge concepts? Okay. What are the differences between construction impacts of the different signature concepts? For example, noise, vibration, ground contamination, disturbance, timeline, etc.
Okay, so let me go backwards here. All of the structure types that we have, Charles, are all concrete structures. That's huge because concrete structures are more durable. They're more rigid. They vibrate less than steel structures, which are thinner and lighter. And that's to our benefit because like most of the structures in Louisiana, most are built of concrete. And because it's very economical and affordable, of course. But we've done initial tests for the different types of mainline structure types. And, you know, between the three types that we talked about, the LG, LU, and the SB, the segmental, and really the costs or the noise difference is insignificant, right? There's not much difference. They're all three concrete structures. Same here with the signature feature bridges. They're all concrete structures. With regards to the construction impacts, we did talk about that a little bit when we evaluated these things from a maintenance of traffic standpoint. And that's where we talked about how some of the more conventional options, 1, 2, and 3, had a reduced construction footprint because they were basically bridges that were already more conventionally constructed with a few signature elements. Whereas with the options 4 and 5, the construction is a little bit more involved. I can tell you that the double arch structure is going to probably require a little bit more excavation because underneath that arch is a tie element connecting these arches together to keep them structurally sound. And so that's a little bit more excavation and of course more traffic impacts. So that's, as far as timeline goes, they all are going to be built about the same time. And we didn't really talk about that in Design Workshop 1. But we've done some studies, and if the whole mainline viaduct were to be built all at once, and if it were, it would probably be about 4 years, and some of the options might be a little bit longer between the three structure types. But so the time differential for the signature elements is not that different as far as having a difference between one or the other. So. And some of the earlier questions, I guess, Bree, you rattled off a bunch of them.
Yes, sorry. There were a few in there. You covered noise, vibrations, ground contamination, disturbance, timeline, etc. The ones before were just some comments about, I don't think it's appropriate to present an idea with features that LCP has agreed to not include in the final project. And then a reference to CWG number 11, the December 15th, 2016 presentation. Charles is requesting that we review.
Yes, and I will go back to those notes from that community working group meeting to see exactly what was presented and how much it differs from where we are today. So,
well, the community working group reference is mainly because that was where the benefits of a signature bridge being included in the project were listed, specifically as to height and reduced pier numbers.
yeah,
I think it's item number 16 on that in that presentation, but it was pretty clear that the case being made for including the signature bridge to the CWG by LCP was that the height could be lifted higher than 22 feet. And there's a graphic included and very clear language making that case. So I just wanted to point that out going forward. Thanks.
And we obviously addressed the second half of that in regards to the option, or I should say the ability to have a more span, more space between piers. And that still holds, right? You saw that in options 4 and 5, how they were literally double, if not more than double, than what a more conventional structure type would be able to provide. So that is an advantage. And what you do under that bridge is, is for the community to decide.
Okay, we have another question, Deidre. She had this one for Jeff. For clarification, are gateway features located in more than one area?
They can be located anywhere that a gateway is perceived. We're only now just showing there. If you look at on the left-hand side of the screen, where those stars are just possible spots. If you were going to do bookends, you'd have one down by the airport and one somewhere south of 10. If you wanted to have, that would be a pair of gateways because, Lafayette's got two ends. If you wanted to have a gateway into downtown, you might just do the one somewhere around, Jefferson or what have you. So it depends on how you want to demarcate the city of Lafayette. Is it when you're coming in, going out from two ends, or do you want to, annotate mostly just when you've gotten to Center City? It could be either one. There could be multiple locations, could be just one. Don't know.
Okay. And then a message from Tim. The 2002 MOA has expired. A new one will likely be required during this process. Thank you, Tim, for that. And I don't see any other questions. Does anybody else have any questions?
Don't forget to do your homework.
Bradley, can we go back to the next steps, please? Thank you. And again, please reach out to your constituents. If people ask you what it looks like, there's no better example. It's just to get on that virtual room and you literally can walk through the corridor. It's just a unique opportunity to see what it would be like. And the images from the main line are still there. So if you want to just focus on the main line, that is definitely to your discretion. And then also, we're going to provide that feedback form. Please help us out and provide content so we can talk about it a week from Thursday. And it's those breakout rooms that are really going to be important. I think it was a huge success last time. We had 6 breakout rooms. And we had, we had 6 different views in some of the structural components. And likewise, I'm hoping to hear a lot of different input, good and bad and whatever for this area as we talk about signature feature bridges and gateway element structures. So I guess, Bree, that's going to conclude our discussion. I appreciate the time we've been able to share. And maybe you and or Tim could help us reach the finish point.
I had one thing I was going to say about Anita's comment at 4:53 p.m. If she's concerned about, costly special, features or significant signature features, look, we're open. If y'all come up with some kind of mural or various types of signature elements or features you see somewhere or you see online, or if you have ideas, maybe not too simple, but maybe not as extravagant as what you've seen here, some of the things, if you have something, look, give that to us, show us something, present it. We're gathering input. We want to see y'all's ideas and take that input and consider that as we move into this process. All right, so don't, if you see some of these major things and you believe, well, I don't think we'll get secure funding for that. If you're in that group where you don't, or you just personally don't believe in spending that much money on such a thing, where you may, consider other things more important, and you want to give input on other features that could enhance the bridge. So feel free to give us other things outside what you saw here for special features. We're more than glad to receive them. So
that's a very good point, Tim. This is only just one man's opinion for anything. We come to you with open hands to ask you, what do you think and what do you got? So this is a two-way dialogue, and we want to hear back from what you think might best work for you folks. Simple as that.
Okay, so we will be sending out the presentation, the feedback form, access to the project link at i49vr.com. And Steve Wallace, I will let you take us out.
Okay, well, thank you, Bree. Thanks for everybody for participating today, and some good conversation. And hopefully all those in the LCAG have come away with some better ideas, maybe how to address the signature bridge and elements and that kind of thing. So we look forward to seeing you guys back on Thursday next week from 4 to 6. And please come with your input and ready to discuss this some more. So thank y'all for attending, and look forward to seeing y'all next week. And y'all take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.